So I'm usually the horror guy. That's kind of the lane that I usually stay in. And although this isn't entirely horror, it's pretty much horror adjacent in my opinion, because this is definitely a disturbing book. Today I'm talking about the book Blood Meridian, why it needs a movie, why this disturbing book needs to be turned into a movie, but not only that, but kind of also weighing the pros and the cons, how they need to do it, how it should be done. So let's get into it. If you don't know what the story is about, it's kind of as follows. It's set in the American frontier, has a loose historical context, and the narrative pretty much follows a fictional teenager from Tennessee, referred to as the Kid. The bulk of the text devoted to his experience with the Glanton Gang, historical group of scalp hunters who massacred American Indians and others in the United States, Mexico borderlands from 1849 to 1850. They did it for bounty, sadistic pleasure, and eventually just out of nihilistic habit. The role of antagonist is gradually filled by Judge Holden, a physically massive, highly educated, skilled member of the gang who has albinoism and takes extreme pleasure in killing everything and everyone he sees. And that just about does it. It's very dark subject matter. Can be very grueling to get through at times because of that, just basically the nature of the story. But this feels like a story that could be told and told really well in the form of a movie. And an adaptation of this book has been long gestating. It's passed through the hands of guys like Ridley Scott, Martin Scorsese, even James Franco was trying to direct a version of this at one point. There's even some test footage out there of what his version would kind of look like. They filmed some scenes, took some outtakes, and it's all kind of interesting to look at. Although those all fell through, it actually looks like we might be getting some form of this, and directed potentially by John Hillcoat. He did another Cormac McCarthy adaptation with The Road movie, which is also a very good film, and hopefully he brings some of what he brought to that to this movie. I hope this comes to fruition because it's kind of hard to actually believe that this is going to happen with how many failed attempts there have been at adapting this. So I feel like until we get something a little bit more tangible, I'm going to kind of hold my horses on getting excited about this. Maybe when they start rolling the cameras, then I'll picture a little bit more, but for now, I guess we just kind of have to talk about it as a hypothetical. Basically, the most cited reason as to why this has never been adapted is pretty much squarely put on the violence. It's very extreme. Like I described, the nature of the story is just very macabre and just very disgusting, grim, and at points there's very many scenes where there's just slaughters, just things that are hard to kind of picture. The book can be very unforgiving at times, and with such despicable characters as the main protagonists, it could just be a very hard sell to the studio in general. That, and then you combine it with the vastness of the story, this thing would definitely need a budget and high production value, and that makes it hard when the story can be so off-putting and just inaccessible to a general audience. I mean, it's definitely going to win Oscars whenever they adapt it, if they do it right, but for now, all we can do is speculate. It just has that handicap of, at what point do they have to water it down to make it actually profitable? It's just hard because it feels like so much of this book is just antithetical to the idea of being adapted. It would just cost so much money, so much would get put into it, and there's just no guarantee with the subject matter that it could make a return. This book also plays a lot of sleight of hand with how it tells the story, and that might be a very hard thing to convey in a movie. Some aspects of the story are just, overall very ambiguous, and to a certain degree you kind of have to lose that if you tell it in a visual medium. There's also some subtle but just very terrible implications surrounding the events of this story, and I just genuinely don't know how they would do it. Granted, that's why I don't work in Hollywood, but I just still have a hard time picturing it in general. If they can't make it into a movie though, I would also love to see this adapted into potentially an HBO miniseries, something like that, kind of a limited series type deal. I think it would be excellent. It would, kind of keep it away from that censorship, I think, but it all depends on how much they pay attention to detail, how much there is passion put into this project. But overall, it could be amazing if they choose to do that. It's just difficult when talking about this story because it has a lot of filth and it really does have teeth to it, and what I'm worried about is that it would lose those teeth if they were to adapt it for the mainstream. But if you have a director and he's very committed to telling the story properly, I can't imagine that would be too much of an issue. Another piece of this that I think is just very pivotal is the casting, especially when you're talking about casting the Judge and the Kid. The Judge, I feel like, would be especially difficult to cast. He's really the make or break, I think, in this situation, because so much of the gravity of the story is put on his shoulders. A lot of the eeriness, kind of the disturbing stuff, especially how much of really a predator he is, just makes it difficult to kind of cast him. Also, the way that he's framed throughout the story kind of changes, and that's something that's kind of hard to tell, and I think that you would have to get a Christian Bale or just a world-class actor who could really disappear into this role and chew up the scenery. Someone who gets the subtleties of the characters, but can also bring the larger-than-life villainy to the role. And on top of that, you know, there's a lot of scenes that I would imagine that they would have to rip directly from the book, especially some of those monologues, like the war monologue. That's what makes this so tough to talk about. The whole point of this whole thing is that there's so many pieces of this that need to come together in order to make it happen to begin with. Nevertheless, make it good, make it work, make it capture the story accurately. My only hope is that it just doesn't shy away from that ugliness, from that grittiness, because there's so much gravitas to the story that is so at risk of being lost when they transfer mediums. Will they get it right? Will they get the implications right? Will the subtleties of the story be picked up on and translated correctly? You get the right person on the project? I definitely think so, but so much of this could fail if not done properly, if not done correctly, and that's the main thing that I really worry about when they try to attempt it. But I still think it's at least worth a shot, because this is considered to be one of the great American novels, and obviously you can pull off Cormac McCarthy very well. Look at No Country for Old Men. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. Very intense. Also, they pick up on a lot of the ambiguity that happens, it seems like, in his books. So much of it really does depend on that. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section. I'd love to hear, have you read this book before? Would you want it translated into a movie? I'd be very curious to see. Those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.